Welcome to the Future is Fun podcast with your hosts, Brian Olds and Danielle Tucker. Buckle up as we explore the latest emerging technologies, business trends, and fascinating discoveries that are shaping our world today. Are you ready? Let's dive in and see what the future has in store. Hey everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Future is Fun podcast. My name is Danielle Tucker, and I am here with my amazing co-host, Brian Olds. Brian, how are you?
Episode 4, we are back. What's going on? Listen, I am doing really, really well. 2023 is off to an incredible start, Danielle, and I'm super excited about this topic and just moving on down the line. I know we have this like massive list of topics that we're going through, and each time I feel like once we get to the place of producing the episode, I'm like, okay, yeah, this is good. So I'm happy you brought this topic to the forefront. I think it's something that everybody, even if you don't have an education around, I mean, this is certainly something that impacts everybody because we all live on this little planet called Earth. So,
Yes. So I wanted just to first point something out. I feel like every year I have the same conversation where I am either talking to you or talking to my mom, and I'm just like, was this winter a lot shorter? Or like, was this summer a lot hotter? Like, have things just been like changing ever since like last year? I know when you came to visit, we met in person for the first time. You came down here to Huntsville, Alabama, and you were in like short sleeves and like shorts just on like the first week of December.
facts. Absolutely. But
And so,
just for context, you live in Huntsville, Alabama.
yes, it's
So,
supposed to be cold in December. Like,
and it's in Huntsville? Well,
yes.
well,
Yes,
yeah.
like snow, like cold. Like it was like, okay, so at the time last year it was like what, 65,
It was
between
really warm.
65 and 70.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yep.
that was surprising to me.
I see. Yeah. Well,
But
I just think anything in the South is supposed to be like hot, but I know all South isn't created equal, so that's fine.
no, usually Florida is pretty warm. That's pretty like consistently. Like I remember when I was a child, like if there was frost on the ground, I would be ecstatic. Like I would bundle up like if as if I was about to go into a snowstorm. That was how exciting frost was in Florida. But I think about having that conversation every year and realizing like, wow, like this is something that is very important to me because I know how things were when I was younger. I see the patterns of how things are changing year to year. And I figured what better opportunity for our episode today than to talk about the future of sustainability. So, specifically, I figured, okay, like to kick this episode off, I'll share a little bit about like the background when I think of sustainability. And then if you want to as well, you can share a little bit with me about, and everyone listening about like what you think sustainability looks like. And then we can look at what the UN says sustainability is. So,
Oh
um,
yeah. Absolutely.
yeah, it's a
Well,
whole
you
thing.
already know
So,
mine is coming from television, so
yes.
you could go ahead.
So, yes. So, for me, when I think of sustainability, I think of the first thing that comes to mind is reduce, reuse, recycle. And how can we make the most systematized approach to reusing what we have, putting less of items or even energy out there that is just doesn't need to be used, and really being very intentional of how we can take better care of the environment where we live. And so I think that's probably the simplest way I would think of sustainability. There's like a lot more to the picture than just thinking about reduce, reuse, recycle, but that's like the first thing that comes to mind when I think about it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, same thing here. I think my impression of this harkens back to being a kid. And so do you remember Captain Planet,
Yeah.
the TV
I
show?
think
More
you're a little
specifically, you
bit
remember the theme
you're
song?
you're a little bit older than me, Brian.
Just a little bit, but so Captain Planet and the official name of the show was Captain Planet and the Planeteers. US animated television series. It ran from basically it was on like syndication from like 1990 to 1992, and so it
Okay,
was
yeah, that
like
was the year I was born.
oh gosh, okay, well
So
that's okay.
no.
But it was like, so basically it was this cartoon that taught kids about um environmental sustainability, about the topic. And so it talked about um you know essentially recycling. Every episode had a different theme. So we talked about pollution, and there was teenage superheroes. So this is like the prelude to Power Rangers almost. And so
Okay.
each of the teenagers had these special rings that they could control different aspects of the environment. So, and actually, the theme song at the end was like Earth, Fire, Wind, Water, Heart. And each of the teens were actually from different parts of the world as well. And so you had somebody from the United States, Africa, the USSR, which doesn't even exist anymore. It was Russia, and so they would fight crime, all these people trying to pollute the earth. And then when the problem got too big that they couldn't handle, there was a crime fighter. They could put their rings together, and it was like, when our powers combine, we're going to summon Captain Planet. And then this blue guy would come up, and he could like, you know, have all these powers to like fight crime and stuff like that. So it was a really, really cool show. But that was my first introduction to um, the environment and recycling and all of that. And they actually had some really cool voice actors on that show too. Whoopi Goldberg was on it.
What?
Um, LeVar Burton, Jeff
What?
Goldblum, Meg Ryan, Martin Sheen. Like I don't know how they got the budget for all these people, but it was really good. So if you have a chance, check it out. But
Oh my
basically,
gosh.
that show informed my impression of just being more thoughtful and mindful of the environment. And so much so that I actually remember Danielle getting mad at my friends for littering. Like, I
What
like
did
when
you
they, how people
do?
like throw stuff out the car window. I'm like, why are you littering? Like, there's a trash can right there, and they're like, shut up,
Stop the
so
car.
I would get so
Turn
mad.
around.
And even to this day, like I think it's just kind of like, ridiculous just to throw trash and stuff like that on the ground where you could like just like throw it away or whatever. But certainly things like recycling and, just thinking about taking better care of the planet has been something that's been top of mind for a little bit. But I still, even with the topics that we're about to dive into today, there's still so much that, I really never even thought about. So
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. It's also, to your point about the car, it's also one of the reasons why one of my favorite things in my car is my car trash can. Do you have a car trash can?
if by car trash can you mean the side console, driver side car console, the side console thing where you put the the
No.
cup holder, yeah,
No.
absolutely. That's where I put all my receipts and napkins, tissues, and it gets cleaned out. Every time I go to the gas station.
That works too, but
I
on
I didn't even know they
Amazon,
existed.
you can search. So if you just Google car trash can, they sell them on Amazon, and you just like hook the little strap over your like the middle divider between the driving seat and the passenger seat, and then you just have like this little trash can. You put like one of those Walmart bags in there, and you just put your trash in the hole, and then when you're done, you just take your bag out and throw it away.
You see, I might be older, but I feel like you and your husband have just figured out life at a level that I haven't been in IKEA in like 3 years. Like, there's just certain things that I'm a little bit behind on. So I always appreciate that. Uh,
Yes. um, it's you shouldn't feel bad because honestly, my husband Devarius was the one who told me about it, and I was like, okay, let's try it, and then we did, and I'm like, okay, we're not going back ever. So it's
it sounds
good.
really convenient. It sounds really convenient.
It's very, very convenient. But yeah, let's talk about some more of like what sustainability looks like in terms of like the UN's definition. So, United Nations, I'm here on the website and they have a 17 goals for sustainable development. And I wanted to share those with everyone because I think this is a very interesting chart to look at for one. But I think also when we think of sustainability, a lot of times we can just think of like the environment. Whereas when I look at the 17 goals, they have like a whole list that it's more like a wholesome list that really encompasses a number of different things that I think are really interesting. So here's a list. Number one, no poverty. Number two, zero hunger. Number three, good health and well being. Number four, quality education. Number five, gender equality. Number six, clean water and sanitation. Number seven, affordable and clean energy. Number eight, decent work and economic growth. Number nine, industry, innovation, and infrastructure. Number 10, reduced inequalities. Number 11, sustainable cities and communities. Number 12, responsible consumption and production. Number 13, climate action. 14, life below water. 15, life on land. 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. And finally, number 17, partnerships for the goals. So, looking at this list, I find it to be very interesting. And this is something that you pointed out. It seems that a number of these different parts within this 17 goal plan actually overlap, which I find to be interesting. What are your thoughts on this chart, Brian?
Yeah, it's really cool. I think we're going to get the graphic up so everybody can see what we're talking about. But all of these are objectively important. I think that, when I look at things like, clean water and sanitation, zero hunger, zero poverty, these seem like things that are essentially basic human rights. Um, it's mind blowing that we can be, in 2023, and such a large percentage of people around the world are struggling with hunger, or famine, actually, and not connected. I'm not talking about connected to war or major like political civil unrest. Just straight up, like they do not have sustainable access to food, access to clean water, access to basic human like services. It just seems like, so that's where the and to your point, these are all connected because like number 10 is reduce inequity within among countries. So what we're really talking about is like resource allocation, I think, and also ensuring that people have kind of like a basic thing. And now once people kind of have their basic needs met, so people aren't dying from hunger, people are getting access to basic food, water, shelter, and let's say healthcare, then there are some kind of larger aspirational things that we can start to move beyond. Like nobody cares about recycling, when you're you don't even know where your next meal is coming from. Nobody cares about, life below water if life above water is like not, sustainable. So it's like then you could kind of move. So I would almost be interested. I don't think these are force ranked, number 1 through 17. I don't believe they are. I think they're just kind of listed. However, I would be kind of curious what the priority is, and also how close we are fundamentally to some of these things. Like, um, here in Maryland, we just had a new governor, and he has this initiative I heard announced to effectively end child poverty and in the state where we live, which is Maryland. And so that's one of the big things he wants to do. But when we start talking about countries, you were talking about millions and millions of people. And so, these things aren't, not only do they not happen overnight, typically it takes a massive coordination um, of resources, government private partnership, as well as influence from the nonprofit world to be able to accomplish that. So, but I think it's really interesting. I think I've seen this list before, but I'm excited that you bring it into this conversation. But I do think, as it relates to environmental sustainability, many of these do overlap, and I'd be really interested to kind of see what happens. Now, I also know that when we start um, looking at things like science fiction, so I start thinking about like Star Trek, and in Star Trek happens like hundreds of years into the future, and I know that part of the basis for the plot for that is that humans have actually at that point got to a place where technologically we're no longer fighting for basic resources around the world. Like, we're no longer dependent on fossil fuels. We've achieved like warp drive and travel amongst the stars. And so what collectively, I think, as humans, once we do get to a place where basic human needs are met, just like we were talking about last week in the AI episode, then it provides a new foundation. So now where we can think about, okay, well, do we really need money? If we cured, like if cancer is cured, if food production isn't an issue, if we're able to, everybody can get access to the same basic stuff, transportation globally is, pretty quick, like, do we need like money? And so there's a whole other conversation there. But generally, when I look at this list, I'm really kind of it's extremely aspirational, and I'm just wonder, like, with some of them, I'm like, will people like actually allow us to get there? And then some, it's kind of like, oh yeah, we should have did this like 20 years ago.
Yes. Yeah, it's very interesting to think about it for sure. And also when you like partner it with sci-fi, somewhat not sci-fi, I guess, since now we're seeing the emergence of like AI now, which is still kind of like wow, like we saw it in on TV like 20 years ago, and now we're experiencing different facets of it. But yeah, it's very interesting to see how all this plays out. And I think the biggest thing that I would say is like if we can individually, if each person takes some level of responsibility for how they can contribute in a way that feels really good for them, like I think that would ultimately help to move things forward in a positive way versus you know um, not being informed and just wanting to just live life however you live life. I think maybe just having more of a understanding, like an awareness about it, but then also taking a personal responsibility to contribute in whatever way that looks like for you. I think that also helps to contribute to like the overall picture of everything too.
Yeah, I'm kind of on the fence about that because I'm wondering, um, because again, going back to the Captain Planet thing, that was kind of their message in the early '90s. It was like, hey, everybody, if everybody does their part, then we can move the needle. If everybody, kind of like the forest fires, only you can prevent
Mhm.
forest fires. But most people aren't out there causing forest fires. But I do think that environmentally speaking, we all do kind of, I think there is a big consumer education piece, because the more people understand about a process, and the more they can advocate for it, the more they advocate for it, the more that we create policies and solutions that enact change. But I think that is really where the power is. Like, if we're not creating sustainable systems, um then it really doesn't matter. Like, I don't have the numbers for this, but there's all these arguments around like how, like, recycling, for example, is like, most recycling doesn't work, and it's not because recycling isn't good or not needed. It's just the sheer um the sheer like the ability to get, okay, we got plastic, paper and these materials. It's like, okay, we can recycle that type of plastic, but not this. Like we can
Oh my
do
gosh.
the
It just
bottle,
starts to
but we
become
can't do the
very,
caps. You know what I'm saying? So it gets
yeah.
very specific. And then there's a cost even associated with that. And so things have to be like that the system is broken. It doesn't matter if everybody's quote unquote doing their part if there's a fundamental breakdown. So I do agree
Mhm.
that I think there should be like an awareness, but without governments and private sector and nonprofits kind of working together to create policies and resources to even allow people to meaningfully participate, we'll just keep kind of spinning our wheels type of thing.
Yes, I definitely would agree with that because I feel like, I mean, it seems like it's easy to be, like we're creatures of habit. Like it's easy to do things by habit, but when you introduce a new system in place, like that takes time to implement. And so I definitely agree with you in terms of like, uh, you know, creating more systems to help create more habit that will ultimately lead to like longer, more effective change when it comes to sustainability. So, speaking of laws and habits and creating more sustainability, I actually wanted to play a quick game. I
Yay, I
have
love
the
games.
top, yes, I have the top 10 list of the most sustainable countries in the world. When I looked at this, I was actually kind of surprised. I was like, okay. But the game is so I have the top 10 list. You may actually know some of these, but I wanted to see if you could guess. How should
I,
we do this? Should I do it like
I
what's number one, or do you want to guess like what's in the top
well,
10 list?
yeah, I'm open to either or. I will say that I have not looked at the list. I purposely didn't when you told me not to. So I have no idea. But I think why don't I get you said it's 10?
Yes.
Okay. Give me 10 guesses and then you could tell me if I hit it. And if I hit it, just tell me where it ranks. So I'll tell you the country and where like I'm gonna just guess that the country top 10 without guessing the spot because I think that's a little too hard.
Yes.
So let me
Okay.
just guess the country and then you tell me if it's on the list and what
Okay,
number it's
let's
at.
do it.
All right,
Go
cool.
ahead.
So first, now I am looking at a list of countries just so I don't have to go off because that's too hard. But this is
Okay.
just like a random Google list of countries. But I'm going to put Canada in there because I feel like Canada is just like very, very just naturally like everybody's in Canada is super polite. Like, have you been to Canada, Danielle?
No, I want to go so bad.
I feel like Canada is just on top of everything. They're like, just like with gun control this past year with all the mass shooting. They weren't even responding to mass shootings there. They were just like, hey, the US is dealing with all these mass shootings. Here's what we're going to do. So I just feel like they're really progressive in that way. So my first pick is Canada.
Yeah, they're not on this list.
Dang it. Okay.
I told you I was kind of surprised.
Okay, that's fine. So that's number one. My
Okay.
second guess, I'm going to go really, really high level Switzerland because Switzerland just seems like they are just like if Switzerland's not on the list, I should just stop guessing.
Switzerland is number 3.
All
So you're
right.
good.
Yes. Okay. There we go. We're getting it.
Good
By the way,
job.
if y'all are listening, let us know in the comments if you're watching online or if you're driving, don't do this. But when you get to a safe destination, let us know. Okay. I feel like all of these are going to be like Nordic countries. Like I know USA is not on the list. I'm not even like
No.
going to do that. And so I'm gonna guess. How about Denmark?
Yes, that was number 1.
All right,
Good
yeah.
job.
Because I feel
You
like
got
because is that like a Baltic? I feel like the northern, like the Baltic, you know, what I'm saying. So okay, all
yeah.
right. So
Yep.
I'm on number four guess right now.
Yes, you're on number
Okay,
4.
all right. Let's see. Uh, what about Luxembourg?
Yes.
That's on.
That was
Okay,
number 2. Are you sure you haven't looked at this list?
I have not looked at the list. I swear I have not looked at the list. I'm just going off of like general like reputation of what I would think are very, very progressive like countries. Um okay, cool. So
You got the
that's
first three down. You've got the
got it.
first three.
All
You
right.
going?
What about Germany? Probably not.
Yes, I believe Germany is on this list. Germany is number 10.
Okay. Just got it through.
Okay,
Okay. So that's number
good
5.
job.
All right. Now I feel like the next few are going to be a little bit harder. I said Switzerland. What about Sweden?
Yes, number 8.
This is okay, okay. Um,
So you got 5 so far. So that means you've had 6 guesses.
all right, let me go with a more industrialized country. So what about probably not, but I'm gonna still say it because they produce like a lot of electronics and stuff like that. So but they're also really advanced. So Taiwan?
No.
No, okay. I didn't have high hopes for that because I didn't because they produce a lot of stuff. So if they were on the list, that would mean
Right,
that they were like super efficient. Um,
right.
let's see. Um, what about like a Caribbean? Um, now some of these, like some of these like smaller island countries, like the Seychelles, like I feel like they should be like really sustainable because they're, they just like happen. They have a smaller like like carbon footprint in general. So
Mhm.
I don't really actually know kind of what goes into the list, but I'm gonna just do a rapid for my next few. Gosh, how many is I'm on my sixth guess, right? Or
You've
seventh?
got 3 more.
Three
3
more.
more
Okay.
guesses.
Gosh. Okay. Oh man, I don't want to be wrong. United Kingdom is definitely not on there. I'm not even.
Actually, it is,
Oh
which was
snap!
why I was so shocked.
The UK? That's amazing. That's good for them.
Yes.
Good for
It
them.
says they're among the top performers when it comes to waste management, sanitation, and the fight to stop climate change. Number
Yeah,
4.
because they were the closer of the superpowers. So that's good. What about Qatar?
No, they're not on this list.
All right, Qatar, and I got one more guess.
Yes.
Norway.
Yep. Number
Yes,
9.
I think I got like 6 of them right.
You got 7 out of 10 right. Great job.
Hey, if anybody in the UN needs a speaker, just brianos.com. Let me know.
Yes.
That was awesome. So
Great
which ones did
job.
I miss?
Okay, so we are missing Finland was another
Finland.
one.
Finland.
Austria was another one.
Would never have
And
guessed Austria.
then this one, I'm kind of like, is this for real? But France.
Okay, okay. Because what it is that so what's this list again? Like how did they come up with this? Do we
This
know
is
like what
on
metrics?
Eon. This is on Eon Energy. It says every year the Yale Center of Environmental Law and Policy's Environmental Performance Index ranks global nations and their success at achieving sustainability. So this is based on the Yale Center for Environmental Law and Policies. And then it
Got
says
it.
a scorecard that rates countries on 32 different factors ranging from carbon emissions to waste management and air quality helps provide policymakers with a snapshot of how well they're moving towards a sustainable future. So that's where they base this list off of.
Yeah. I'm fine with that. I think at the end of the day, again, these are initiatives and policies that take decades to get like traction. And so I think not every country can be great at everything, and that's fine. I think the US likes to think it's, the best at everything.
The best, yeah.
But it's kind of cool to see, other countries, model um some of these plans. So, I definitely after the show, I'm gonna dig deeper and see kind of what it is because some of these are surprising. I'm really curious what Austria and some of these other countries are doing to get that recognition.
Yeah, I'll make sure that we can share the link in the show notes because yeah, it shares a little bit about what each of the countries is doing that has like helped in terms of their ranking, but yeah,
Nice.
it's a very intriguing list, that's for sure.
Yeah. Does it give you the list, the rank of all the other countries? Like, do we know where the US is on that list, or is it
Wait a
just kind of
minute, let
just the
me
top 10?
see. Let me see
Because
because it gives me like a
I feel like the
it
US
doesn't
would
show
be
me, it just
like,
shows me like the top 10, but I do, yeah, I have to research that a little bit more because it gives like the reference to the Yale University Environmental Performance Index, but it doesn't give me a link to it. But that would be something interesting to see.
I think the US is like 89 or something.
Oh,
Like, it's like we're
it's
like
painful to think about.
we're like, because there's only like 194 or 95 countries, depending on who's counting.
So
Like, it's
you give
not
us
like
like
that many.
a 50%, we're in the middle,
Yeah,
50%,
like, so yeah, it's not like I feel like we're just kind of hanging in there.
not the ultimate fail, but not the best.
We're right. We're like and wherever we are, Canada is probably like a couple notches ahead, I'm sure.
Yeah, yes, definitely. Well, yeah, well, let's keep talking about this. So we went through the 17 sustainable development lists for the UN. We talked about the top 10 countries, most sustainable countries. And now I wanted to give like a brief overview of looking at sustainability from the context of like the environment. I
Hmm.
think that would be like a great place. I know there's so many different ways that we could be thinking about this, but I would love to like hone in on like the environmental component with this. So here's a brief description that I found from greenmatters.com, and it talks about like what are carbon emissions and what causes them. So when I want to start off talking about this first because some some of our listeners may be have like a high level overview of like environment and sustainability. I know before I started researching this, I was kind of, I knew it was important, but I didn't really completely understand the dynamics of how all of this played out. So I'll just read this really quick just to kind of set the stage and then we can talk about some more interesting stuff. So all right. So maybe you remember the greenhouse effect from school. Let's start there, everyone. The greenhouse effect is the natural process of how the sun warms the Earth's surface. When greenhouse gases release into the atmosphere, these include carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, ozone, and water vapor, and trap the sun's heat. They warm the average global temperature, causing it to rise. This is known as global warming. What should happen is that infrared radiation escapes into space, but instead it gets trapped in our atmosphere and warms the planet. So, as a result, carbon emissions are one type of greenhouse gas emission that happens when carbon dioxide enters the air after human activity or process. They are crucial to this conversation because they are the most significant type of emission in the terms of quantity. As of 2017, carbon emissions comprised of 82% of all total greenhouse gas emissions in the US. So, this is a reason why carbon emissions are like a big part of the conversation whenever it comes to sustainability, global warming, and the environment of the world as a whole.
Hmm.
So, perhaps the most important way that carbon emissions affects the planet is by causing climate change. As the average global temperature warms, our climate inherently changes and it warms. This warming causes extreme weather events like tropical storms, wildfires, severe droughts, and heat waves. And while an increase in carbon in the air can, in some ways, positively affect plants and crops, if the climate changes the lands and causes drought for other weather events, or other weather events that crops and plants are unable to survive in, it can be detrimental to crop yields. So, that is the brief summary that I took from greenmatters.com just to kind of set the stage and give us an understanding of like what in the world we're talking about here. So, did any thoughts come up for you as I was reading that, Brian?
Yeah. So I mean, I think first of all, have you heard of like an Inconvenient Truth, like that documentary that Al Gore did like back in 2006?
Ah, I
Not
don't.
that you've seen it, but just have you heard of it?
Yes, yes, I have. Yeah.
Yeah, so there are all these kind of like um like spin-off, and this is actually weird enough, this is like my favorite genre of movie. I don't know why. It just is.
You
I
are a big
love,
movie buff.
well, my not so not the documentary. Like the documentary is like terrifying, but because he's talking about um climate change, whatever. He's basically Al Gore, has been trying to sound the alarm about um global warming for years, and the fact that we as a people, to your point earlier, like we had the ability to reverse some of the things that we're doing to the planet. And there's kind of different factions of people. Some people believe global warming is real. Some people believe it's a myth. Some people believe that it is real, but it's a cycle. And so, it'll start and then it'll stop. It'll go back. Like we don't need to do anything. And there's all these opinions in between. And so it's really interesting to me much how this one topic, tends to divide so many people. And I understand why, because there's so much money. And like as soon as you introduce money to the equation,
And
it
it's
becomes
inconvenient to change your lifestyle. It's not convenient at all.
yeah, and that's at an individual level. Never mind, like imagine having like a coal mining in your portfolio, or you're running that, or you um oil is the thing. Like there are a lot of like the most wealthiest people on the planet have a vested interest to um continue practices that aren't necessarily in line with the planet's best interest, based on, scientific research. And so now it's like, okay, well, you know, they're going to do everything they can to like bury that or kind of kick the can down the road. And you got other people like sounding the alarm that this is really happening. But right now, everything that you're saying, Danielle, kind of happening, I've now been on the planet almost 4 decades. And so, have the ability to kind of, even in my short lifetime, see the apparent alleged, ramifications of global warming. And you described the average global temperature rising slowly over time, and the impacts of that. We know that glaciers are melting. We know that storms are becoming more violent. We know that weather patterns are absolutely changing, and so it's just a matter of, are we going to believe this is true or believe that it's not true? And so I think that is all like really good context. Um, One of the things I looked up just as a thought experiment as we were talking about this is, have you ever seen those YouTube videos where it talks about like what would happen if all the humans in the world like suddenly disappeared?
No, but I can imagine it was probably very interesting.
It is super interesting. And so there's this one YouTube video by this channel called Mind Warehouse. It has like millions and millions of
Oh,
views. And it says the 10 things that would happen to the planet if humans were to suddenly disappear. And it's a cool thought experiment because I think all the things that you're talking about, like carbon emissions, so obviously plants, factories, automobiles, like there's all this effort to kind of curtail our use of production that is actively contributing to all this global warming. But if humans just suddenly disappeared, like for some ridiculous reason, whether it's um you know virus or asteroid is probably a little different, because I think there'd be other consequences for that. But like if we just suddenly disappeared, here's what would happen. It said just a few hours after humans disappeared, obviously all the lights around the world would shut down. Of course, electricity would halt. But like 10 days afterwards, all the pets and farm animals would start to die out due to starvation and dehydration. A couple weeks later, all the little dogs, like people have all these pets and stuff, they would be like the first ones to go, because like little dogs can't really, they're domesticated, so they're not designed to like survive in the
Why is
wild.
that funny and sad at the same time?
It's really sad. I don't want
Oh,
anybody coming after
okay.
me. Like it's super sad. So you're lovable, like all the golden retrievers and stuff, they wouldn't make it. And then the rest of the dogs would kind of come together in packs, and it would be this roving street gang of other dogs. So real survival of the fittest types of thing. Number four, like a month after humans disappeared, the cooling water, the water and like the nuclear power plants that we have around the world, which there are a lot of power plants around the world that rely on nuclear energy. The water would evaporate, and so it would trigger a series of explosions that are stronger than the Fukushima and Chernobyl explosions. So that would start kicking off like 30, 40 days in. A year afterwards, all the satellites that are orbiting around the planet would start to come down and free fall into the Earth's atmosphere. 25 years later, this is number six. 25 years later, 75% of the planet's paved streets, all of our sidewalks, they would be covered in grass and vegetation. So all the, there'd be no sign of street signs, any of that. Like it would all be covered up. Cities like Las Vegas and Dubai would be covered in sand. Um, like the cities like no longer existed, like the desert would retake them. Number eight, like this is 300 years into the future. All of our buildings, particularly like metal objects like the Eiffel Tower, San Francisco Bay Bridge, they would start crumbling. And in the video, it shows like a depiction of that happening, and it's like really terrifying and jarring. Um, Number nine, all the swamps would, you know, kind of reappear around most of the world where they were like retroformed. And then number 10 is that um, in 10,000 years, the only evidence of man made buildings would oh, yeah. So it's saying that in 10,000 years, only like, the pyramids and like really, really solid, well constructed buildings might stand a chance of surviving, but everything else would be gone. But the environment as a whole would kind of like return back to like a state of like homeostasis, and the planet would continue to survive. So I thought it was really interesting because like what you're saying is like, hey, on one hand, humans, this is planet, like this is the only planet that we have that could sustain life that we know of. And humans, it's up to us to kind of take really, really good responsibility for it. But if we suddenly disappeared, the planet would like start thriving like almost immediately. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, that is very intriguing. I need to take a look at that video actually. I feel like that would be very interesting to see. Speaking of humans disappearing, I guess, not really disappearing, kind of reclusing. I have another interesting study that I wanted to talk about from the National Library of Medicine, and it talks about how the ozone layer of the Earth's atmosphere was able to heal itself in the midst of lockdown during the pandemic.
Hmm.
And what it says is that researchers at NASA reported that the ozone concentration above Arctic regions of the globe decreased by around 240 Dobson units as compared to the ozone concentrate in March 12, 2020, as compared to ozone concentration in March 12, 2019. Such low levels are very rare and happen about once per decade. NASA reported a comparatively higher concentration of ozone over the Arctic regions in 2019 in comparison to the low level of ozone concentration in 2020. And let's see, in the ongoing COVID-19 lockdown across the world, it's showing that there's a direct correlation between air pollution levels and economic activities such as industrial activities, transportation and energy production, along with the small scale interferences at city levels. This suggests that clean energy based uh, system has to be adopted as the coronavirus outbreak ends. So I was looking at this report, and uh, they also, if you were to look at this report, it shows like pictures of like where the atmosphere like healed itself and within the time of people being in their houses and not driving around going places for like a year, which is like so amazing to think about how much things can change in the atmosphere just by not driving or like just not being around doing things and being in your house. Like the atmosphere literally is able to heal itself.
And
So
and that's over a period of like that was like less than a year, right?
that was less than a year. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, I think, things like that are really interesting. And, you know, there's probably arguments on the other side because while that was happening, the global economy probably lost like $10 trillion or whatever it was, just based on, stuff not getting manufactured, stuff not getting built, people losing jobs, etc. So it's kind of like, okay, well, that's nice, but at what cost? And so
Mhm.
that's what I'm saying. Like there's always going to be this tension between, until we get to a certain level of like innovation and efficiency, I think there's always going to be this like capitalistic tension of, hey, you know, we want our big screen TVs, we want our like, our fast fashion, we want our whatever, but we also kind of need to make sure that we still have a planet in the next 300 years. Who is responsible for calibrating this demand versus this now versus later expectation? But I do remember on the pandemic they were talking about in New York, which was obviously the epicenter for a very long time for COVID-19. um I remember seeing like videos of like dolphins swimming in like New York Harbor for the first time and seeing like whales, in the Chesapeake Bay, like, just really, really, really visible and visceral examples of nature almost celebrating the fact that we're locked in a house for like months at a time. So yeah, I think this is really interesting.
Yes, that is very interesting. So you mentioned fast fashion. I want to jump to that topic because this is something that I have been thinking about. I love clothes.
Do
I
you?
love, yeah. I mean, most of the time you'll probably just see me in a sweatshirt because it's comfortable, but like I also enjoy like I enjoy viewing like nice fashion. You know what I mean? And
Yes.
so for our final part of our conversation, I wanted to talk about fast fashion because this is something that I was made more aware of at the end of last year. And since being more aware, I've been very interested to see how that like ties into the overall scheme of things. And I would also love to hear your opinion about it too. So the Merriam Webster dictionary definition of what fast fashion is an approach to the design, creation, and marketing of clothing fashions that emphasizes making fashion trends quickly and cheaply available to consumers. So, overall, fast fashion contributes to 10% of global carbon emissions, and roughly 70% of the $3 trillion fashion industry is comprised of articles made from synthetics and petrochemicals. So that's just a little bit about what fast fashion is and how it ties into our overall conversation of sustainability. But I would say from like a consumer perspective, fast fashion can feel almost like addicting, especially like with the whole era of like TikTok and YouTube shorts and Instagram reels and people wanting to stay on trend, look fashionable, like with the whole like influencer marketing type of thing. Like people want to look good and also the idea of doing it in a way that's not maybe the most expensive. Like if you can get something that looks designer without having to pay designer prices, there's also that element too. I think of why it's like so, buying fashion and things that are on trend is like so desirable to a lot of people. But looking at it from like a fashion perspective of like how can we make the enjoyment of the clothes we wear and experiencing fashion and appreciating it, how can we make it more sustainable and do it in a way that is like respectful to the planet, but without, compromising our joy and love for fashion and what it is. So
Hmm.
I know, Brian, fast fashion is something that I just shared with you briefly, I believe it was yesterday. And like, what's your like first thoughts about fast fashion? Are you a fashion person? Do you care about fashion really? Like, what are
Yeah.
your thoughts?
Yeah, well, everybody knows I'm the most fashionable person now. Like I think I think I may have purchased like, you know, 3 new pairs of pants like last year or something like that. Like I like to me, clothes is kind of like it's like function over fashion most of the time, but I do want to make sure I have a couple pieces just to be prepared for stuff. So like, blazers, um, and nice pair of, jeans and stuff like that. But here's what I'll say about this. You introduced me to this term fast fashion, and I know there's a lot of conversation about it. We This was not covered in an episode of Captain Planet in the early 90s. And I think there's a couple reasons for that. Number one, the the needle has moved so quickly. And I think as a large portion of the two intersections of technology that you talked about, social media and e-commerce. There was no Amazon in 2019. I mean, 2000, 1990. Sorry, there was no Amazon. And the consumer expectation around how quickly we should be able to get something that we see. Back in the 90s, people were like shopping by catalog, and it was okay to get your product in like a week and a half, 2 weeks. Um, and you probably weren't going to return it. If it's, if it was a little off, you just kind of dealt with it. Now it's like, ooh, like we'll order 50 things because it's free shipping and we can get it like in 3 days. And then we'll send back like 45 things without even thinking about it, and it just like sits in a warehouse somewhere, or maybe it never gets used, and then it gets, sits in a landfill. And so these are all things that I previously, I hadn't thought a lot about, where my clothes were made, what they were made out of, or what happens when I no longer want them. Like, I'll donate them or they go in the garbage, but I'm like, I'm not really thinking about that. And I think the but now I am. And so it opens up a bigger conversation. And I think, consumers now are becoming much more mindful. And so for the folks that are entrepreneurs, and really, that list, Danielle, that you shared, those 17 global initiatives that the UN has, I think if you're an entrepreneur or even an investor, you should be looking at um, business opportunities that are attached to those 17 objectives, because ultimately, that's really where a lot of opportunity is going to come from as consumer education continues to make people more informed buyers, and people are electing to put their support behind companies that are going to prioritize sustainability. And so, to that end, I wasn't too aware of it before, but now I am. And so I started looking up, okay, what is sustainable fashion? And so sustainable fashion, as defined by earthday.org, refers to clothing supply chain that is ecologically and socially responsible. And so there is this desire to there is this trend that's happening right now for consumers to move away from the fast fashion model toward more sustainable practices. And that's all up and down the supply chain. So sourcing, production, distribution, marketing, and consumption. So it's like there's opportunity in every level of the supply chain to be more mindful, intentional, and sustainable. Now, I think that for me, you know, there's again going to be this push and pull, because consumers are still going to want. I mean, it's really hard to go from, hey, I can have these 50 items tomorrow in basically whatever color I want, to, oh, let me just get one or two things. And so I was mentioning to you that I was at a business pitch competition yesterday at Morgan State University, and the girl who won actually had a sustainable fashion business. Part of her business model was to have a series of essentially like consignment shops. And so once people were done with their clothing, instead of donating it to Goodwill or even just like tossing in the trash, they would source those gently used items and then curate them in a way where you know consumers can still shop online, get their stuff relatively quickly, but now they're taking like brand name goods and stuff like that, and you're getting quality brands, you're getting discounted prices, and you're also kind of being environmentally conscious. And so she won that business competition like hands down.
I
And
know she did.
she crushed it, Danielle. And so I think that is where things are going. And here's why. The same article was saying that the fashion industry produces 150 billion garments a year. Um, so it's like 40 million tons that ends up in a landfill. And so when it goes in landfill, it just kind of sits there because most of these garments are made out of um, materials that aren't naturally going to like biodegrade. The other big issue that again I had no idea about is the dye, the coloring. So from a textile perspective, textile dyeing is one of the most polluting aspects of the global fashion industry. And so like I saw this article about this town in Bangladesh, and the guy, is like, this guy's like 40 or 50 years old, and he was standing next to a river, and he was like, when I was a little kid, my family, we used to fish here. We used to, before the textile like company moved in, they used to, it used to be an amazing kind of place just to be. And now the river is black. And it is the most heartbreaking thing that I ever seen. And so basically what happens is that the discharge from these factories, like to create a blue shirt or a black shirt or yellow or whatever color, that takes water, and that waste water has to go somewhere. And so that water in Bangladesh and in other communities around the world is they're getting the discharge of that, and it's not just coloring, it's like a cocktail of cancer causing chemicals, dyes, salts, heavy metals, and it ends up not just hurting the local environment but also water sources in that community. And so this piece is a much bigger conversation. I think that I've always just thought about, hearing about like the Nike like sweatshop. So I've always thought about it from like a labor perspective of like, oh, I don't want to wear something that, some 10-year-old kid in China is getting paid like, 6 cents an hour to make. Like that has always been a big thing. But now this other part opens up in a completely different part of the conversation.
Yes, yeah, that was everything you shared was very well said. One thing that I've been thinking about and that I've been researching is the idea of having clothes that decompose when you're done using them.
Mm,
And yes, there's this one company, it's called Unless, and they market themselves as the first streetwear brand to create products that will harmlessly decompose at the end of life. So, it's made 100% plant-based nutrients like recycled cotton, hemp, plant-based leather, coconut fiber, plant-based materials like that. And I was watching the video, and it showed like one of their hoodies or like t-shirts like that was made, and then it showed it like after a month of it being in a composter, and it was like falling apart, which was like really
mm.
cool. I feel like having more clothing that could be compostable would be really great. I think it would be able to be very well sold to like the mass public if it were made in a wider variety of like designs, uh, different concepts. And also, I think a big part of it would be popularizing different, of course, different trends and having clothing designed with those trends in mind. So that was one thing I wanted to share that I thought was like very intriguing. It's
I
like,
wonder
yeah, go ahead.
I wonder if they like is the life cycle of their products the same as the non-sustainable counterpart? So like that hoodie, like how many times can we wash it? Like does it stand up the test of time? Or is it kind of like, hey, the expectation is you can wear it for a year, but then it's going to start um decomposing or whatever naturally. Like I just wonder what the thing is, because I actually really like that idea. But the other stat I ran across is that like the average person buys 60% more items of clothing than they did 15 years ago, but we only keep them for half as long. And so the average garment may be worn as few as 10 times before disposal. So I'm wondering, I think in general, particularly in hyper consumptive countries like the US, like we tend to do that. Like we buy way more clothes than we actually need, but people enjoy kind of having like the option. And also if you're living in a place that's like hyper seasonal, like, you may only wear a hoodie 3 months out of the year, but keep it for 2 or 3 years. I wonder if their hoodie would last that long, or if it is the expectation like, hey, I'm gonna wear it once a year and then, just kind of rebuy it when I'm ready to wear it again.
Yeah, that is a good question. I'm not sure how long it lasts. I know that they can be like machine washed and reused. And I think like once you put it in dirt, it will start to decompose. Like you kind of have to bury it. Um,
Oh, okay, that makes
yeah.
sense. I see, because
But
that triggers the compost process.
yeah, yeah. And what was yeah, I also think it could be really cool to have like you know how like you can vacuum seal stuff? Like
Yep.
if you have like a whole bunch of stuff, you can just vacuum seal it and then like put it away for like the next season or whatever. That could also be like a really great way to like keep your clothes for longer over time if it were to be like that compostable type of clothing material. So that was another thought that I just thought of.
Yeah,
But
maybe let us know in the comments as y'all listening. Have you heard of fast fashion? Are you thinking about sustainable fashion? Like how does that factor into your decision as consumers? I'm really curious to know. Now, I'm wondering because there's some stuff I want. Like, I mean, I mean, I might be buying some clothes this year, but I don't. It, it's really really interesting to me that um, something that we took for granted for so long, and this covers like everything that we talked about today, from driving, pollution, like some of these topics we're gonna go into more on the Futures Fun podcast. But it's like there's so many things that you just kind of take for granted. It's like, oh, that's just how we produce energy. That's just where clothes come from. That's where food comes from, and now there's like an actual conversation around it and an option. So I just think it's really interesting that we can we have an opportunity to as people really guide the direction that this is going, because the reality is we got one planet right now. Elon is working on getting us to another one, apparently, but for the time being, for the foreseeable future, we got one planet, and I think we should be trying to take care of it as best as possible. I don't think there are any perfect solutions, and I don't think it's any one kind of government's, even though we're here in the US, we didn't make the list, but that doesn't mean we're like absolved from responsibility of trying to create these things. But just from a business perspective, for the folks that are listening, I really just think that if we could just kind of think about how to have both, because I think sometimes it kind of gets into the conversation, this or that, can we have it, um can we be fashionable and still be sustainable? And I think the market is kind of proving with some of these case studies that, yeah, we absolutely can. We don't need to use as much energy. We don't need to pollute waters in Bangladesh. We don't need to um, um we do not need clothes like 12 hours after we ordered them. Like, it's okay. Like, we could wait a couple days if it means, being a little bit better for the earth, my opinion, but probably not everybody else's.
Yes. Great. Well, I think this has been a great conversation. I've definitely learned a lot. How did you enjoy this conversation, Brian?
Lots of stuff I need to learn. I'm very I mean, I was happy that I just guessed like 6 of the countries. So
You
that's
guessed
that.
7. That was
Oh,
really
yeah.
good.
That's that was my win. I'm good for the rest of the week. Like, I don't
Yes.
need to um
Good. Well, I think we're good to sign off. I just want to say thanks to everyone listening. We always love having you here, joining and having us listening in your ears for the Future is Fun podcast. So, for everything that we talked about today, we're going to include it in the show notes on the website. So, you can go and check it out at the Future is Fun podcast.com. You can listen back to this episode, check out the show notes, read through everything, and you can also find the links that we mentioned today as well for all of the different references and articles that we were talking about. So, with that being said, I think we're ready to sign off and close. We have officially come up with our sign off catchphrase. Are you ready, Brian?
I'm ready.
Okay. So, with that, until next time, keep dreaming, keep innovating.
And we'll see you in the future.
That's right. All right. Bye, everyone.